My friends, the Russian army is preparing a large offensive this spring. But at the moment, on the surface, it seems as if the Russian army is barely making any progress these days. I mean, this is what we keep hearing. And I have to admit, it's partially true. When was the last time you saw a flag raised from the Russian army? Why? Because barely any settlements are being captured. And I mean, overall, in terms of territorial gains, it's not glorious.
This is the amount of land we've recaptured since yesterday.
Deep State reported that March 2026 was the worst month for the Russian army since spring 2024, with 160 square kilometers gained. Meanwhile, according to the Blackbird Group, Russia only gained a net 25 square kilometers in March. As for the ISW, they reported only 5 square kilometers gained that month.
Right.
What's going on? These three pro-Ukrainian sources can't even agree with each other. In comparison, MK Mapping on Twitter estimated Russian net gains in March to 135 square kilometers. Now, because of bullshit research papers like the ISW, former US Army General and CIA Director Petraeus said Russia no longer has the upper hand. So I guess Ukraine is winning, right? Right?
No.
The reality is that Russian forces are currently in an operational pause. That's also what the Russian Telegram channel Two Majors reported on the 28th of February. On the front, the situation is characterized by a kind of operational pause. And as a reminder, March 2025 was also a low point before explosive gains in the summer. Same thing for March 2024, which was followed by the Ocheretine breakthrough. That's because the weather in March is notoriously bad. There's mud everywhere, and there's no cover from drones out in the open. After analyzing each sector of the front, my conclusion is that Russian forces are indeed in an operational pause, but it doesn't mean that they're staying idle. They're continuously testing Ukrainian defenses along the entire contact line, looking for weak points and gaps that they can infiltrate. We can also believe the Russian command will wait for the greenery of spring to launch large-scale operations. One of them being a coordinated offensive along 3 axes against Ukraine's crown jewel of Slovyansk, a town that is now located only 15 kilometers from Russian lines. With that being said, many Russian military bloggers are worried about the Ukrainian wall of drones that could become too dense to break through. Military correspondent Alexander Karchenko wrote, "Our offensive is being stopped not by infantry but by a line of drones." He added, "Drones have completely taken over the battlefield. In 2024, you could still get through on a motorcycle. In 2025, you could run through the landing zone. But now only the lucky ones reach their target. Aerial control is total. Movement between points only takes place in bad weather." And then there are also numerous Ukrainian counterattacks that were reported along the entire contact line. And Russian military bloggers don't understand why the Russian army is unable to hold the ground. Welcome to the headquarters. It's been a while since my last Ukraine war update. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like, hype, and subscribe. So in this video, I'll walk you through on what's happening on the most important sectors of the front. So it's perfect if you want a summary of the last few months. And for each sector, we'll analyze what we can expect from Russia's spring offensive. Now I must show you an urgent signal from the Pentagon that is unmistakable. We have entered an era of resource-constrained warfare. The message is clear. Critical minerals and rare earth metals are now treated like oil in the 20th century. Strategic, scarce, and weaponizable. As you know, the modern battlefield is no longer defined solely by manpower and armored vehicles. It is categorized by technology, AI systems, and precision weaponry. At the core of it all lies a foundational input, critical minerals and rare earth elements. The sponsor of today's video is North American Niobium and Critical Minerals. The ticker is NIOMF. On the US brokerages like Fidelity, Schwab, Interactive Brokers, E-Trade, and others. North American Niobium and Critical Minerals Corp focuses on exploring for rare earth minerals and critical metals in North America. The West doesn't stand a chance without domestic and secure mines. It comes down to one word: readiness. I repeat, North American Niobium and Critical Minerals Corp., ticker NIOMF, explores North America's only niobium mine. And it's in Canada, more specifically in the province of Quebec. Otherwise, 90% of the global supply is controlled by Brazil. On February 2nd, 2026, we saw the turning point for North American resource independence with the launch of Project Vault. Clearly, that was the moment of the rebirth of this mining sector. So we're super early. The opportunity is in the complete shift in mining rare earth and critical minerals in North America. And here's the brutal truth. There is one rare earth mining on US soil right now. Mountain Pass, California is the only active rare earth mine. But it's a drop in the bucket. Processing still relies heavily on China. China controls approximately 85 to 90% of global rare earth processing capacity. That's not a market dynamic, that's a choke point. Because in a future conflict, you cannot build missiles without rare earths, and you cannot run AI without energy and critical minerals. You cannot scale production without secure supply chains and domestic mines. Neodymium and praseodymium, which North American Niobium and Critical Minerals Corp., ticker symbol NIOMF, is exploring for, are a perfect example of early-stage opportunity. Research North American Niobium and Critical Minerals Corp., ticker NIOMF. Let's start with the confusing situation in Kupyansk, this city located all the way north of Kharkiv Oblast. Days without Kupyansk being a total clusterfuck. We were told by the mainstream media that Ukraine had liberated Kupyansk. But in the last video I did on the Battle of Kupyansk, I already had my doubts on the official narrative, because it was clear that Russian forces still held parts of town. These were the approximate areas of control of both Russia and Ukraine by the 19th of December. And it was pretty much the same thing by early February. I guess Russian forces didn't run away. For example, on the 7th of February, the Ukrainian 47th Engineering Brigade dropped explosives on a house in this sector, suggesting Russian presence near the high-rise district. 3 days later, the 13th Khartia Brigade targeted Russian infantry at these three locations near Kivka. This goes to show that Russian forces still held positions east of the P-79 highway, unlike the claims made by some analysts on Twitter. On the 19th of February, an assault team of that same Khartia Brigade captured 3 Russian soldiers near the Memorial Park at the center of the city. This means the AFU advanced 300 meters northwards. Ukraine's general staff also marked these 3 multi-level apartment blocks as an important Russian stronghold in Kupyansk. Moments later, Russian drones of the 122nd Motor Rifle Regiment cleared the sky of Baba Yaga bomber drones and targeted Ukrainian soldiers in these commie blocks around the Memorial Park, thus confirming Ukrainian gains in this direction. But as you can see, by the end of February, the Russian armed forces still controlled part of Kupyansk. Then, in a video published on the 5th of March, the 425th Assault Regiment Skala clearly showed follow-up operations in that sector near the park. In the footage, we can see a couple Ukrainian assault squads clearing the Kupyansk hospital.
We have captured a building, my lord!
An important position that the Russians captured in November. 1 week later, on the 13th, the Russian 121st Motor Rifle Regiment droned numerous buildings in this area that I had already marked as lost by Russian forces in December. So, no major changes in 3 months. That's when, a week later, surprise, surprise, a Russian patrol was detected at the southwest entry of Kupyansk. The fact that this video was recorded so far from the other Russian positions, I don't know. I mean, when I'm looking at the map, we're talking about 2,000 meters beyond the contact line. I think this is actually an old video from the fall of 2025, and that was just posted recently. On the 22nd of March, infantry units of the Ukrainian 425th Assault Regiment Skala patrolled the city center. But once again, this area was already abandoned by the Russians by mid-December. Overall, these are all the positions where the Skala regiment struck Russian forces in Kupyansk between the 28th of March and April 1st. And with the release of these videos, Skala admitted that Russian forces reappeared in the hospital district. Or it just means that the Ukrainian assault against the hospital in early March failed. And then on the 5th of April near Holubivka, a Russian storm detachment captured a Ukrainian soldier. This could indicate the arrival of Russian reinforcements from the Oskil River front, and that are now pivoting south towards Kupyansk. So in summary, no real territorial changes in Kupyansk in the last 3 months, meaning Ukrainian assault regiments didn't make any progress since December. While the clusterfuck of Kupyansk continues, we can also observe that the Russian 6th Command Arms Army operating along the Oskil River front did not make additional gains in the last months. Just like I told you in my last report, it seems the objective of the Russian command is to pin down the AFU in Kupyansk proper, while the 1st Tank Army takes full control of the east bank of the Oskil River. And this is obvious when we take a look at the latest combat actions in this direction. On February 1st, a Ukrainian assault group cleared a building near the train station in Kupyansk, Vozlovy, that was occupied by Russian forces. The problem is that it took place 7 kilometers beyond the contact line. The next day, the commander of the Ukrainian 43rd Mechanized Brigade recorded himself in that same settlement, stating his men captured 2 Russian saboteurs from the 153rd Tank Regiment sent forward to raise flags. Because it's true, raising flags deep inside enemy lines is a form of information warfare. This could trigger some panic by enemy forces, which could pull out from the entire area altogether. On February 9th, the Russian 1st Tank Army launched a major assault on the east side of the Oskil River. Everywhere, Russian infantry squads were infiltrating through Ukrainian defenses. One group was spotted pushing into Petropavlivka from the east. It's weird, for example, this Russian soldier here was totally unaware of danger and only saw the FPV drone at the very last moment. To me, this is the proof of poor training in drone countermeasures, which is crazy at this point of the war. It could also mean, it's speculation, that the Russian command selects older men from storm detachments and just sends them forward as bait. Yeah, I don't know. At the same time, a Russian MTLB troop transport was destroyed 3,500 meters beyond the contact line. Not far from there in Podoli, the drone operators of the Ukrainian 14th Mechanized Brigade also targeted a group of Russian riflemen riding quad bikes. At last, Russian forces were also targeted by bomber drones while advancing into Korylivka. On the 20th of February, Russian infantry was once again spotted in Kucherivka. And like I always tell you, those were only the troops that were detected by Ukrainian drones. Because in urban areas, it's much easier for riflemen to find cover. So when a Russian company commander sends 3 groups of 3 forward, it's possible that one of these groups gets targeted and just annihilated by drones, but you still have 2 groups of 3 that can infiltrate and capture the position, without the Ukrainians being aware of it. In the same fashion, a fire team of 3 Russian soldiers was recorded entering a high-rise building near the train station of Kupyansk, Vozlovy, only 300 meters away from where the commander of the 43rd Mechanized Brigade recorded himself 3 weeks before.
We are winning!
From the river to the sea. Hold on, no, wrong video. With the river to their back. All the Ukrainian units deployed on the east bank of the Oskil River found themselves in a precarious situation. By the 15th of March, the Russian 1st Tank Army redirected numerous reserves towards Korylivka. If successful, this push could cut the Ukrainian salient in half. And from there, Russian forces could use the forested areas to encircle the entire Ukrainian battle group. But Ukrainian drone operators of the 3rd Territorial Defense Force reacted quickly and intercepted a number of enemy armored vehicles and infantry units. 3 days later, Russian drones from the 352nd Motorized Regiment intercepted a 4-man Ukrainian rifle team near this railway. Thing is, these drone strikes took place just outside the village of Piszczany, which is supposedly fully under Russian control. Once again, this goes to show how porous the front line is these days. That same day, the Ukrainian 14th Mechanized also intercepted a column of 2 MTLBs and 11 quads east of Petropavlivka. So although there are little territorial changes to be reported in Kupyansk proper, as well as along the Oskil River, it's on the east bank of the Oskil that the Russian command is concentrating its attacks. And according to the latest news, Kurylivka is most likely under Russian control, meaning the AFU has only 3,000 meters before the bridgehead is cut in two. What about Pokrovsk? Nothing to see here. Another reason we get this perception that the Russian army is barely making any progress is because it barely made any progress around Pokrovsk. We all remember November, December, the city falls into Russian hands. This was the front line on February 1st. And this is the situation over 2 months later by the 11th of April. And yes, forgive me, I'm gonna use deep state on this one due to the lack of alternatives. But you get the general picture. Let's say even World War I commanders wouldn't be impressed at the rate of advance of these operations. Over 100 years of military thinking, new doctrines, new technologies, only to advance meter by meter. Actually, barely anything is happening along the 130-kilometer front between Kostiantynivka and the Zaporozhye direction. Oh yeah, there was this Ukrainian attempt to regain a foothold into Pokrovsk, and they got clapped. But it's a long story and I wanted to make a self-standing flashpoint about it. In my opinion, the Russian command went on an operational pause on the 45-kilometer-long Pokrovsk front and shifted its attention on the salient centered on the crown jewels of Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. So unlike Ukraine's general staff that is planning counteroffensives by micromanaging battalions and brigades, the Russian command is maneuvering entire combined arms armies at the same time. And this time I think they're going for a head-on assault via 3 axes of progression: north with the Lyman direction, center with the Siversk direction, and south with the Kostiantynivka direction. And I think this is the approximate line the Russian command wants to reach by this summer, which could be the staging ground before the final assault on Slovyansk. But to do so, Russian armies will have to capture the urban areas of Lyman and Kostiantynivka. So let's zoom in and check out what's happening in both these cities. Let's start with Lyman. By February 1st, the Russian 20th and 25th Combined Arms armies were besieging Lyman and formed a semicircle around it. With the capture of Yampil in late November, Russian forces could now outflank Lyman from the south through this forest. You know what I'm doing these videos, usually I get the maneuvers right, because that's something you can figure out using logic. But the thing that I never know is the time that it will take. At the same time, it's not as if I was sitting in the Russian army headquarters. Or am I? That's how on the 5th of February, Russian patrols started penetrating the southern outskirts of Lyman. In response, the Signum Battalion of the Ukrainian 53rd Mechanized Brigade counterattacked, and in close coordination with the FPV drone operators, managed to mop up the area. As a result of their raid, 2 Russian soldiers were captured. On the 13th, another Russian soldier was captured at the southeasternmost tip of the town. The Ukrainians know that it's always very important to hold the tip to prevent the release of enemy troops into the urban area. But if we analyze the latest Russian moves, this means we can expect more infiltrations by the 25th Combined Arms Army in this direction. Meanwhile, the Russian 20th Army was getting jealous, and it also wanted to get a foothold inside Lyman from the north. To do so, it was imperative to secure the settlement of Dobrisheve. That's where, on the 17th of February, Ukrainian drones targeted Russian units just outside the village. 1 week later, Russian patrols from the 25th Army advanced 1,000 meters and were spotted on the eastern edge of town.
Into the breach!
On the 27th of February, drones of the Russian 16th Spetsnaz Brigade targeted Ukrainian infantry at night in the village of Stavki. Stavki is the small settlement 4 kilometers north of Lyman that acts like an outpost that prevents Russian forces from maneuvering properly. It's a bit like Hougomont during the Battle of Waterloo. I don't understand. Why didn't the French just go around it? Anyway, let's stop talking about Waterloo and let's continue with Ukraine. On the 15th of March, it seems some Ukrainian troops infiltrated the way south of Yampil. That's when they got targeted by the Russian 169th Motor Rifle Brigade. 5 days later, the command of the Russian 20th Army decided to break the deadlock once and for all by storming the village of Novoselivka using brute force. However, the large mechanized column sent against it was halted before it could even reach the objective.
Sounds a lot like the old direction.
Drones from the Ukrainian 3rd Army Corps swarmed the enemy column, and in the end, they destroyed 6 armored vehicles, 10 quads, and 5 motorcycles. It seems that some vehicles were hit, but they still managed to quickly disembark their infantry components, only for them to be chased down by various UAVs. In the introduction, we were talking about the lack of progress, and that's because the Russian command really doesn't know how to break through anymore. The old tactics don't work. That's why many Russian Telegram channels keep repeating that constantly increasing the size of the army alone won't solve the tactical deadlock imposed by Ukrainian drones. And to me, it also shows that there is very poor coordination between armored columns on the ground and Russia's drone units that are meant to clear the sky before the column goes in for the attack. But look, once again, the Russian army is composed of hundreds of brigade and regiment commanders. It's possible that some of them manage to properly launch attacks and coordinate with drones, while others are just incompetent and don't understand modern technology. On the 22nd of March, Russian infantry further expanded its area of control in Dibrova. This is extremely important because this village is located only 4 kilometers away from this critical road linking Lyman to Slovyansk. 5 days later, a Russian 4-man team was targeted even further inside Lyman. And 48 hours after that, it's a Ukrainian rifle team that was targeted in the same sector. Now, on the 2nd of April, the Ukrainian platoon Ruptor of the 3rd Assault Brigade sent one of their UGVs against a Russian holdout inside Novoselivka, which could indicate that the Ukrainians are slowly releasing their grip on Novoselivka. So in summary, the Russian 25th Army is making a lot of progress in the forested areas. So, if the 20th Army managed to secure Novoselivka and Dobrisheve, Lyman would find itself in an operational encirclement. All the roads and logistics would be effectively cut off. That explains why Ukraine is fighting so hard for these 2 settlements. It's also possible that the Ukrainians are planning some sort of counterattack in this direction because it's really getting critical. So just like in Kupyansk, we can see shaping operations being carried out by the Russian armed forces in preparation for a big push in spring. For the south, the Russian 3rd Command Arms Army of the LPR made a lot of progress, especially following the capture of the stronghold of Siversk on the 11th of December. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I made an entire video about the battle for Siversk. Link will be in the description below. Personally, for me, this is one of the most critical fronts for Ukraine right now, because they're getting their asses kicked. As an example of the latest Russian gains, in early February, Russian forces got a foothold in Nikiforivka. Look, forgive me, it's been a while since my last Ukraine update. That's how, on the 24th of February, some of their forward elements were detected in the hamlet of Lipivka. This was a tactical breakthrough.
Into the breach!
But the 4th of March, all the Ukrainians could do was to send swarms of drones to pin down enemy forces, but they could not effectively dislodge them. 1 week later, Russian patrols secured a foothold in Fedorivka Druha. It was a real disaster for the Ukrainian 30th Mechanized Brigade. It just got swept aside. Vasyukivka is gone. Privilya is gone. Minkivka was about to fall. Let's just do a before-after. That was the frontline situation in the Siversk direction on February 1st, and that was the situation by the 20th of March. The Russians advanced nearly 10 kilometers. So this goes to show that this war is not linear. The Russians were edging around Siversk for 3 years, barely making any progress, and after the fall of the stronghold of Siversk, they literally broke the deadlock and now they're on a run. And as you can see here, there are not a lot of Ukrainian units deployed there in comparison to other sectors. This means the Ukrainian command barely had any reserves left to counterattack. Although we can mention how on the 19th of March, assault squads of the 425th Assault Regiment Skala, yes, as you might have noticed, they're everywhere, launched an attack in Minkivka, which resulted in the capture of 3 Russian soldiers. On the 26th of March, Storm detachments from the 123rd Motor Rifle Brigade attacked a Ukrainian position 1,000 meters west of Kaliniki. This means the village most likely came under Russian control as well. I also wanted to point out that this 123rd Motor Rifle Brigade, manned by guys from the LPR, is known for being the first Russian unit to have implemented motorcycle assault squads. And as you can see here on the 31st of March, they continue this tradition. In this one, the Ukrainians claim the assault detachment was composed of 16 motorbikes, meaning 2 small Russian rifle squads were on the move. So on the Siversk direction, Russian forces are benefiting from the total disorganization of the Ukrainian 11th Army Corps. And because of that, they're making a lot of territorial gains. It's a critical direction for the general staff of the AFU because Russian vanguards are only 15 kilometers away from the first houses of Slovyansk. This means if Ukraine wants to reinforce this sector, they will have to pull forces from other sectors, which will mean more Russian gains in these directions. This is the entire Russian strategy at the moment. Now let's take a look at the southern pincer and the Russian assault against Kostiantynivka. I invite you to check out the last report I did on this battle that I published on the 16th of February. In summary, this was the approximate frontline situation in mid-February. The Russian 8th Army closed in the 8-kilometer distance to the outskirts of the city. Hundreds of Russian soldiers were now edging just outside Kupyansk, and then they started outflanking it from the east. Simultaneously, Russian forces also broke through west of the Krebanbik reservoir and put a lot of pressure on Kostiantynivka from the west. A textbook case of double envelopment, with Russian reinforcements pouring from all directions toward the city in preparation for the final assault. Since then, the few Ukrainian units remaining near the Krebanbik reservoir pulled out and withdrew towards Kostiantynivka. By the 23rd of February, the Ukrainian 44th Mechanized Brigade mustered its available manpower for the defense of the fortress, but the troops seemed tired and exhausted. 2 days later, Ukrainian soldiers of the Kord Brigade were seen operating in Kostiantynivka. One important fact about this battle is that it was Russian drone operators that had the upper hand over the sky of Kostiantynivka, and they made the life miserable for the defenders of the city. As you can witness in these videos, the Russians had total drone supremacy on the battlefield. Ukrainian rifle teams are literally being hunted down. And as you can imagine, this makes the arrival of reinforcements, replacements, very difficult for the AFU. And this means this creates gaps in Ukraine's defensive perimeter, in which Russian forces quickly infiltrate.
Our men flee the battlefield!
As an example of the Russian drone supremacy over Kostiantynivka, in this video we can see a Russian fiber optics drone just camping, chilling in the grass, before flying across the city and double tapping a Ukrainian armored vehicle. But if we watch the entire footage in reverse, we can see where the drone was camping. We know the strike happened right here, so the drone flew over this bridge overpass. Here it flies by the city sign, before we see its starting position. Touching grass, you know? Personally, I prefer the part without the grrr. But jokes aside, the drone was deployed 7 kilometers beyond the contact line, meaning the drone was hiding somewhere here, right at the entrance of Kupyansk, and it flew 3.5 kilometers to its target. And notice how the drone was camping right beside one of the main roads going into Kostiantynivka. And whenever a vehicle goes into the city, some of these drones get called to act. Imagine this dystopian situation for the defenders when you have hundreds of enemy drones just lurking in the grass in the forests. And at any moment, they could attack. This also means in this sector, the Russian unmanned systems command is extremely well organized. Technically, the Ukrainians would need to have small robots that hunt down the drones hiding left and right. And this is on top of constant artillery strikes and FAB bombs falling across the city. With that being said, despite all this, the Ukrainian defense held up and no Russian breakthroughs were to be reported since mid-February. Well, until the 23rd of March, when Ukrainian police officers of the Safari regiment threw an anti-tank mine in a building occupied by enemy troops. The problem is that this building was located right in the industrial district at the center of Kostiantynivka. Nobody knows. This could be a one-night stand type of thing, or it could evolve into something more serious. In the following footage, this Ukrainian artillery unit was very proud to show its latest strikes. But turns out these were geolocated right here in the industrial sector. This means Russian patrols are currently infiltrating the entire southern districts of the fortress city of Kostiantynivka. And on the 1st of April, entire Russian sabotage teams were detected 2,000 meters beyond the contact line. And once these Russian assault detachments push into Kostiantynivka, it's like migrants doing a touchdown in the Schengen area. Once they're in, then they can travel everywhere. Anyway, as you can see, the overall situation is much more nuanced than believed. Every part of the front is facing its specific situation. It's true that Russian territorial gains have slowed down, but that's because the Russian army is essentially carrying out 3 urban battles at the same time: Kupyansk, Lyman and Kostiantynivka. And it's not a coincidence that they're prioritizing these urban battles in winter, since it's the only place where Russian infantry can find cover against drones. While these urban battles are taking place, that means this spring, we can expect a strong Russian effort to close in the distance with Slovyansk, and further strain Ukrainian reserves by adding another urban battle for the AFU. That's all I have for you today, and see you in the next one.